Now you can get 20% off our summer courses from PMI at www.tactech.ca.
Outside of Agile to energize and continuously improve your teams. And what I'd like to do today is show you some practices out of my Lean toolbox that I have used with Agile teams to increase their agility and improve their efficiency. It also, some of them you'll see also help to identify problems or impediments in the process. Then once we can identify it, get that transparent, we can actually do something about it. So a little bit about me. I've been working with Brent for the last couple of months actively on some tech stuff. I actually came to Agile and disciplined Agile through a journey of Lean. I worked with an organization for many years in IT and development, programming, moved into database work and then into business analysis. And actually by accident got sent on a Lean Greenbelt course that was 6 weeks in length. It was very intensive. And after that, I actually ended up being a Lean lead within our organization and started to look at continuous improvement in IT using Lean techniques. After 2 years of doing that, I pitched back to the directors at the time and said, was this enough? Have what we've done in our small continuous improvement actually moved the bar enough? And although they were appreciative of all the work the teams were doing and we were doing to move the organization forward, it wasn't enough. And that's when our Agile transformation was born. So I came into Agile from the Lean world, and I hope to show you how the principles of both are so tightly coupled, and you can really use one with the other, and it's a nice complement. Well, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Agile Principles from the original manifesto that's almost 20 years old now. And at a broad brush, this is just a subset or a condensed version of them, but at a broad brush, we're really interested in high collaboration, motivated individuals, continuous improvement, and having that working software as a measure of progress. If we flip over and look at the Lean principles of software development, we're looking at flow at the pull of the customer, building quality in, respecting people, and delivering fast. So what I'd like to show is a comparison of the two and how connections can be drawn between the principles of both methodologies, which can help us give us some insight on how an Agile team itself can become more lean. So when I look at the circle there of the Lean principles, I'm going to start at the top, the 12 o'clock, eliminate waste, and kind of work my way around. The Agile principles of simplicity and inspection and adaptation are at play with that eliminate waste principle in Lean. When we think about keeping things simple and through our regular inspections, we can actually eliminate our wasteful steps in our development process. We are likely to reduce some of the tasks that slow us down and increase the quality of our face-to-face conversations in that daily stand-up. So by meeting daily, we can highlight waste early and eliminate it and to get it out of the way. When I look at building quality in, one of the Lean principles, I think about attention to technical excellence and using early and continuous feedback. This helps us to ensure that priority is given to adding customer value. And we want to ensure that once we deliver something of value, we don't have to go back to it. So we want that quality built in. And one of the techniques I'm going to show you later on is really going to talk about that focus of building that quality in. In Agile, there's many ways we can create knowledge. I've used several different techniques: pairing, swarming a problem. We have this guild, for example. So our community really thrives on creating and sharing knowledge. And we meet regularly at that daily to promote some of that knowledge sharing. So it's kind of built into the process itself. So in general, self-organizing teams are motivated to learn and grow and deliver their commitments to continuously improve. Differing commitments goes along with keeping that sustainable development pace. So in Agile, we defer our decisions to the latest responsible moment. We're not trying to flush out 18 months of requirements and hand it over the wall. We're trying to evolve it and refine it at the latest possible moment we can, so that we ensure that we're incorporating our latest learnings from the last sprint, for example. When I think of delivering fast, I think about Agile teams measuring their progress through working software. The way we look at our work intentionally is to break it down in small consumable chunks so that we can release more frequently and delight the stakeholders. Respecting people goes hand in hand with building projects around motivated individuals. And we encourage highly respectful, highly collaborative environments, but we also have to provide that psychological safety in order to ensure that that teamwork, trust, and respect can be fostered. And lastly, when I think about optimizing the whole, and I'll show you a technique for this, out of my Lean Toolkit, when we look at regular reflection and adaptation, it helps increase the efficiency of how our team is operating. We want to look at not only improving our own team's process, but also how we fit into the greater organization. So we want to understand the bigger picture, and that makes our team better equipped to understand and welcome changing requirements. So I hope that I've shown you that both mindsets are based upon similar principles of continuous improvement, emphasis on feedback from the customer, and eliminating unnecessary processes in order to increase our efficiency. Now I'm going to flip over a little bit to the disciplined Agile mindset, and why. One of the reasons that I like disciplined Agile is because it bakes the lean thinking and principles right in. It's captured the mindset of DA. This is fairly new this year. They had their own manifesto that they evolved from what they learned from the original manifesto over the years working with teams and organizations. But they've evolved it to this mindset even further. And we believe that the DA principles that you're seeing there, and we promise to adopt the behaviors and follow the guidelines when we're doing so. So there's a purpose for each aspect of the mindset that you see in each of those columns. The principles provide a philosophical foundation for business agility, and they're based on both lean and flow concepts. Then the promises in the middle, that blue, are agreements that we make with our fellow teammates, our stakeholders, and other people within our organization who we interact with. The promises define a collection of disciplined behaviors that enable us to collaborate effectively and professionally. And lastly, the guidelines help us to be more effective in our way of working and in improving it over time. So if we can look at this mindset and the way we approach our work, it already bakes in both of those lean and agile principles that I walked through. So I'm going to be walking back to this picture a few times to show you where in the life cycle that I've used some of the techniques and practices that I'm going to walk through. So whether you're using Scrum or Kanban or whatever flavor you like, there is some semblance of getting a product backlog in place, understanding and breaking down, refining the work, and releasing or deploying it. And so how that looks in your life cycle will vary depending on what you're using, but just thinking of those steps as we walk through with some of these techniques. So delivery teams or product owners or coaches and scrum masters can use some or all of these practices to understand their processes and move forward with actions to continuously improve. And these are the 5 I'm going to show you today. I used to have a couple more, but it was just drinking water with a fire hose. It was just too much. So I scaled it back. Hopefully that will give us opportunity to talk about some of these a little detail after or answer questions. But what I'm wondering, and if you want to just chat this and type it in, is how frequently right now might you incorporate lean principles or techniques in your practice? So yeah, just feel free to enter it in chat. Is it all the time? Are you already a lean shop and it's just all the time? Is it weekly, a couple times a year? Okay, I've got one sent to me. Some teams use lean, others don't, as much as possible. I've used most of the principles, but it's not that I have proper training. That's okay. Okay, so I'm going to move into the techniques and we'll just walk through these. Again, as Brent said, if you have questions, we can pause and field those, or we can leave them to the end. I'm free either way, whichever you prefer. So with the first one, Kano Curve. I look at this one, if your feature backlog seems endless, you don't have the opportunity to build everything right now, and you want to create a product roadmap with the right features. So you really want to get the focus on your product roadmap to ensure that you're really addressing the voice of the customer. So, we use this again for voice of customer to identify valuable features, minimum viable product. I'm learning more about minimum business increments, and product characteristics that prove to be a differentiator. So these I like to call your wow factor or delighters when we're moving it out to our customer. So the Kano curve, you can plot epics, features, or stories here. So how does this work? This is a Kano model, and most of these techniques I've done in person in facilitated sessions by Second Nature, where you have sticky notes on the wall and you can move them as your group is brainstorming and discussing. These could also work in a tool like Miro or Mural, where you can get people virtually using sticky notes. So it's still possible to run in some of these sessions, if not all of these techniques virtually, just as you would in person. I don't think that would prevent you from doing it if we're distributed. So how would we do this? Well, we want to plot our product characteristics or user stories on this diagram. So we were looking at the extent to which the feature is implemented in the product, and we want to look at the level of customer satisfaction that will result from implementing it. So from delight down to disgust. So let me talk through an example here. Back when I traveled more than I have lately, when I look at an airline experience from a customer point of view, a must-have for me, so something that would get me really disgusted, is if I would land and my bag would not arrive. That is something that, like, for me, it's a must-have. When I'm traveling and I land, I want to have my baggage in my hands within a reasonable time of getting off that plane, 10, 15 minutes, whatever that might be. But if it's absolutely not there, I'm not going to be a very happy camper. For the should haves, for me personally, I like to fly in an airplane that has a TV. I typically use that time as a relaxation time. I might snooze or watch a movie. And I will actually choose an airline that has TVs over one that I know does not, even if it costs me more. Could haves, or the delighters at the top for me, would be if it would ever happen, if they randomly upgraded me to first class, where I could get off the plane first, comfortable seats, a little bit more room. So those are an example of those different levels and how you would plot either service or product features on this Kano curve. And how do you derive this information? So for those must-haves, we might use customer complaints, error reports, or survey results. And these are things that need corrective action. Like there's stuff that we have to include in order to keep the customer with us. If we don't include it, we risk them leaving. The should haves, we can use things like customer input, focus groups, or look at what our, pardon me, our competition is doing. These are things that are gonna help us remain competitive with others in our industry. The could haves, those delighters, those are things, we can derive those from benchmarking, Gemba visits, that's a lean term for going and seeing for yourself. So going out to the customers and seeing how they use your product and what they might be able to do differently if we offered something different. Actively collaborating with the customer, pardon me. And so those could haves, those delighters are really the innovators. There's what's going to set us apart from our competition. So how would we use this for an agile team? Well, I would look at, or when I would use it, might be before or during the inception phase. So if we're just kicking something off with a new product or a revitalization of a product, when we're looking at fleshing out roughly that notion of our product backlog in rough relative priority order. It would help us identify some of the minimum viable products, and again, help to flesh out the product roadmap based on including some of the things that we must have to keep our customers, but also hopefully some things that will set us apart from our competition. So that's the Kano curve. The next one I wanted to talk about, were there any questions, Brent, on this one before I move on? Or if anyone wants to come off mute? Nope. Okay, I will just keep fleshing through. Pardon me. The next one I want to talk about is value stream mapping. And I talked about one of the principles of lean, of seeing the whole. And really a value stream really represents the flow of material or information from when we first get the customer request and all of the steps required to bring the product or service from the raw material out to the customer. So it's a graphical representation of that end-to-end process, and it'll help us to identify areas of potential improvement. So you could map the value stream. Ideally, the lean definition is from customer to customer, but I've also used this on more detailed sub-processes underneath it. I've used it with teams to identify even just mapping a user story to understand where the problems were in the process of delivering a single user story. So you could use it to see the whole, or you could use it to see a portion. We can use it to understand the product or service that we're building for our customer, or we can use it for our internal organizational processes. So how does this work? We want to get together a group of 7 or 10 people. Ideally, the makeup is a third of the group is doers, people actively involved in the process. A third outsiders, including, if possible, a customer or somebody who's going to ask the innocent questions of why, because they don't understand the process. If we have all doers in the process, there's a lot of things they don't realize they're doing by by second nature. They're just doing it. So the outsiders bring different questions to the table for those doers to stop and really think about it. And then of course the other third would be made up of your sponsor or team leader, manager, or other stakeholders. We want to start by identifying the scope of the process that we're going to map. So we want to level set everyone in the room of what is it, where are we starting and where are we ending? And then we want to identify those key steps in the process. Ideally, you want to call out wait times as its own and time those, because those are ripe for elimination or things that you want to get rid of first. So in this example, I've got blue as the current state steps, and red is the wait times. Underneath, you'll see a timing. Now, I've seen timing done a number of different ways, depending on the facilitator of the value stream mapping. Just like in Agile, there's a 100 different ways to do it. It's the same with this one. What I've tended to do is a best and a worst, because it sometimes will depend on the skill level of the person executing the process. Sometimes it'll depend on variance of waiting times, or who's in the office or not in the office. So yeah, I will do our best guess of the best case and worst case timing. Ideally, you would want to be actually timing these if you can. Lots of times it's people's best guess as to how long it takes, or if it's like something that's kicked off by something automated in your system, like an intake process where you've submitted a ticket and then someone needs to respond or dispatch, you can actually use those system timings in order to get those best and worst case right out of your systems. So how do we use the timing? Well, there's two measures here of lead time and cycle time. Lead time, if you added up all the times of all of the steps, that's the lead time. What is the amount of time from when I initially put in my request, or as a customer asked for the product or service, until when it actually was delivered? That's the lead time. Cycle time is the amount of time that each individual step takes. So in theory, if we remove wasteful steps, that lead time will shrink. So the time as a customer that I'm waiting should shrink. We want to identify, once we've got that rough current state process mapped out, and again, typically I would use stickies here, or there are process mapping tools you could also use electronically. I do like the stickies or the virtual stickies, because people will tend to move them around as they discuss the process itself. So once we identify the steps and the timing, we want to look at which of these steps are value add, business value add, or non-value add. A value add is something that a customer is willing to pay for. So I know that there is some cost to you preparing a burger for me at Burger King, and I'm willing to pay for the materials and your wages, because that's the cost of me getting my burger. The business value add is something that the company must do, like legislative requirements. So if I continue with my burger analogy, Burger King, I want my burger to be prepared in a safe environment. I want them to adhere to the occupational health and safety and the health advisory rules that they would have. And we know they have to pay their taxes and do that. So those are business value adds. There's things that the company must do. I don't like paying for it as a customer, but I realize that it's part of the cost. The non-value add, though, those things that are red dotted there, there's no value to either the company or the customer. So those are, and I believe it's the next technique, will show you some of those non-value add things that you want to look for. Waiting is one of them. There's no value to the company or the customer in waiting. Approvals are another one that I often see. In banking, a loans officer, if their loan threshold isn't high enough and they always have to wait for an approval from someone else, that wait time is passed on to me as a customer. So we want to make sure that the threshold is the right level for the type of business client that they're dealing with. So from that current state map, we want to identify the bottlenecks and contributing issues and problems. So what is contributing? I've circled some of the ones there for the bottlenecks, the things that we want to hone in on. What are the contributing issues and problems that have been raised? And then once we identify some of the issues, we can look at brainstorming options to eliminate them. What could we be doing different? So the next step would be, and I don't have a picture for it, to do a similar value stream map, which represents the ideal future state with those steps eliminated. So in this case, it would literally be 3 steps, step 1, 3, and 5. And you can imagine the lead time shrinking. So typically the process steps will go down as we eliminate those non-value add steps and wait times. So the one example I have of the value stream map, I've got a couple, I'll just stick to one in light of time. So I was involved in helping a data team. Their month-end data mart build process for the finance team was 11 days. So they had a number of steps that involved like pre-steps to the actual system running the batches. They had several manual pre-steps of checking the data and then a checker checking the data, and they were doing all of this manually to prepare these spreadsheets to load to run some batch steps. And when we mapped it out, again, the lead time was about 11 days. So if you can imagine a finance person waiting to do some month-end decision-making until the 10th or 11th working day of the month, is you're losing half of the month. So we did this process. We eliminated a number of the manual checks. And those actually were instituted because the people weren't comfortable at one point in time with the way the spreadsheet was coming in. And that was actually just passed down from person to person as they hired new people. But that was no longer an actual issue with the spreadsheets anymore because it had been resolved a long time ago with some queries that people had built, but nobody trusted that process. So sometimes when you're looking at eliminating waste, you have to look at historically, why are we doing this, and is it make sense anymore? And then the other thing that really took time was their actual system processing steps, where they were waiting for one step in the batch to complete before starting the next. But because they had changed their servers and their technical environment, they no longer needed to do that. They could be concurrently processing. So after 2 months of this event where we mapped that out with the future state and some technical changes and some process changes, it went from 11 days to 4 hours. So they had it on the 2nd day of the month by noon. So, you know, it can be significant like that. Yeah, I've seen a lot of good things come of value stream mapping. So when would we use it? We can use this before or during inception when we're looking at the product to be built. Because if it's something that's already in place and we're, say, looking at different way of service delivery, a different way of customer response or customer processing, or a different way of delivering the product, it could be useful to understand those wasteful steps that need to be eliminated and build for a better future state. We can also use it in retrospectives within our team. So remember I said we could use this for a sub-process. And so one of the things I've done as a retrospective with a delivery team is look at the intake of a user story, one that maybe carried over a sprint or horrifically 2 or 3 sprints, and why was that carryover happening? And mapping it through, and the wait times, maybe it was a permissions issue with our servers, maybe it didn't adhere to our definition of ready, can really help the team focus on what's the action they can take. If it's outside of the control of the team, it actually gives that information data-wise to give that to the product owner or manager to do something outside of the team to help the team along. So that's value stream mapping. The next one is 5S, and for people new to Lean, quite often this is one of the first techniques you'll learn, which is really looking at identifying waste and cleaning it out in order to really get a solid, stable process in place. So it's looking at identifying waste, fostering that efficiency and maintenance, and then continuously improving that. Quite often 5S is used for shop floors. Lean came out of production, so or something tangible in nature, like organizing your office space. But 5S can also be used in software delivery. And what I really like this table, and I will put it up during my value stream mapping sessions so people have top of mind some of the wastes, whether you're dealing with a production, whether you're dealing with a service industry or an IT delivery, the different types of waste that you can be on the lookout for. And we want to try to eliminate these. That's the continuous improvement aspect of it. And I think we can provide these slides after. So 5S, again, it's helpful for identifying and eliminating sources of waste. If I were to look at this in one of the initial Lean projects I had, I brought home and I thought, you know what, I'm gonna 5S my linen closet. It's not something that I go into a lot, but I know there's a lot of stuff sitting in there that I probably haven't looked at in a long time. So the sort phase, and if you're thinking of a physical space, is you're going to look for things that you no longer use, and you can, in my case of a linen closet, you're going to donate that, sell it on a garage sale, or maybe it's not even worth keeping and throw it away. You're going to look at things that you use all the time and things that you might only use sometimes. So once you've got that sorting into the 3 buckets, you can then do something with it. You then set it in order. So what is the best way to organize my linen closet now that I have sorted it out? And once I figure out the order, probably the stuff I use less higher up, the stuff I use most often right in front of me. Shine, we want to clean our workspace. We can identify problems more readily if everything is in its place and neat and clean. So we want to keep it that way. If you're like me, over time, it tends to just get thrown in there and then it piles up. And then standardize. So I have seen, if you've seen those tool boards in garages where they trace around the hammer, trace around the screwdriver, so everyone knows where it goes. That's standardizing. You could do that as well, and then sustain it. So you want to keep it that way. When we're looking at this process in software delivery, it's not something tangible typically. It's knowledge work. So when we're looking at sorting, we want to throw away unneeded items. These are things like dead code, unused imports, unused variables, redundant code. We would want to refactor it. When we're looking at systematize or setting in order, it's about organizing our project and packages. There's a term in Lean, have a place for everything and everything in its place. This comes to play in this step. So we want to resolve those package dependencies, minimize dependencies. When we're looking at our product or iteration backlog, we want to make sure that the stories and tasks are visible to stakeholders and they're kept up to date. With Shine, again, problems are made visible when things are neat and tidy. So in software delivery, we want to resolve any test failures. We want to improve our test coverage. We want to improve our test performance. We want to resolve any warnings that we get. And we want to make sure that that product and iteration backlog is really kept neat and clean. We don't want the product backlog to get out of control and be endless. We want to keep it fairly focused for the next couple of months ahead of the team. And standardize. Once we get a clean slate, we need to keep that way. So we want to reduce the complexity over time to improve the ease of maintenance. And we want to adopt and follow lightweight development, enterprise architecture, data, and security standards. So we don't want to get rid of the fact that we work for an enterprise and there are standards, but we want to make them lightweight and consistent. And then lastly, we need to sustain them. So where we can, we want to use and follow standard procedures. Now, in Agile, we respond to change in a disciplined manner. That doesn't mean that there's a lack of a standard. But our standard for our team, whatever our team's processes, we want to make sure that it's fairly consistent so that we can become predictable for our stakeholders. So when would we use 5S? So when we're first in inception and looking at kicking off a new team, for example, when we're setting up the physical and virtual workspaces. So Brent and David and I went through the exercise of our team site and how are we going to store stuff? Where are we going to store stuff in the SharePoint where it's easily accessible for everyone? How are we going to consistently name things? And then our backlog, making sure that that's set up, that it is easy to use. We can use this throughout the construction phase to help identify any waste that we're encountering through our delivery process. And again, with our retrospectives, we can use this in parallel to a value stream map to help understand where wasteful steps are in our process. And then if we use these in retrospectives, we can look at actioning items to remove the waste and improve, because lots of these things you can't do all at once. So I'm going to pause if there's any questions before I move on.
Go ahead if there's any questions. So far, so good. Just for those looking at the chat, I'll be putting in a few links to what we're talking about here and what Lisa's pointing out specifically around value streams and why they're so important. And some additional information that that is in our Foundation of Lean course as well.
Thanks, Brent. Next one is the Fishbone or Ishikawa diagram. This tool is useful for identifying the underlying problem that you're trying to solve. It can help your product owner to focus on the issue at hand as opposed to solutioning. Quite often, and I'm sure Brent, you've experienced this, when we go in as an Agile coach, one of the major problems is they're always focusing on, I just want to add a button, as opposed to what is the actual problem you're trying to solve when you're creating the user stories itself. It also helps in determining what is valuable. So identifying symptoms versus problems and helping you to organize those ideas. So first we want to capture the issue or problem that we're trying to solve, or if we don't have that initially, what is the focus of the brainstorm discussion that we're talking about with the team or our stakeholders. And again, I've often done this in person on a whiteboard with sticky notes, but you can use tools like Miro or Mural in a virtual environment and brainstorm over a Zoom or Teams call. So the best way that I can describe this is how I've actually used it in a retrospective with a team. So that's how I'm going to describe this one. So the team that I was a Scrum Master for a short stint, I noticed that they were missing their commitments, sprint over sprint. And I was starting to get concerned. I wasn't clear if they were overcommitting at the beginning, like if they were just really trying to satisfy their stakeholders by promising all these things, or what the reason was. But I couldn't really put my finger on why they were missing their commitments, because they were like your A team. They were a rock star team. They gelled really well, and they knew their stuff. So it wasn't really adding up, working with the team and then seeing them every sprint kind of miss their commitments. So we walked through this as a retrospective. So when we looked at people and we're talking about the team missing their commitments, some of the stickies that they put forward was a lack of commitment from required stakeholder, a sick team member that was on extended leave, so they were down a team member for a number of sprints, a micromanaging boss, that one up there. And I'll describe these a little bit in a second. Processes, they had sticky note, unplanned work, unforeseen circumstances with waiting on another team, and not having necessary software permissions. Under priorities, conflicting priorities, no defined sprint goal, unplanned work, and product owner not available. Under programs, slow technology, build failures, no available environment for one or more of the stories. Under products, complex requests which did not adhere to definition of ready, was added mid-sprint and not broken down. Pardon me, I'm losing my voice. And policy, overly complex enterprise architecture and development standards which were slowing them down. And the manager introduced additional tracking requirements. There was also an unknown security issue. So the team, after compiling all of this, it set them up to be able to ask why on one or more of these issues, to actually start to unearth the root cause. Now for this team, there was actually more than one root cause to different problems. So the problem that we were initially talking about was the carryover of work. But what it unearthed was, well, there was a lack of a dedicated product owner. They actually had 9 that all had number ones. So they had no go-to. It was a violent rejection of a good practice in Agile. But it was partially the organization's misunderstanding of the role as well. And so they had 9 product owners because they were a service team. They felt they needed 1 for every area in the organization they worked with. But a result of having 9 product owners was 9 number 1 priorities. So there were known priorities in that sense. The second major problem that unearthed was the manager themselves was introducing unplanned work. They weren't honoring the team's commitments. Thou shalt do this whether it's ready or not. And then the third one, in addition to that, was they didn't have the right permissions to do the work they needed to do with the technology that they had. They always had to go to someone else, which slowed them down because it introduced waiting. So after analyzing those results and the potential causes, it can help the team identify things that they can do, if we're looking at self-organization, to take action on. The unfortunate thing was most of the problems with the carryover of work was out of the control of this team. It was things broader in the organization, but it gave the manager and product owners group information to take away, to look at how they were working with the team differently, to allow them to put action into place to help resolve the carryover of work. So where I have used this diagram is in Inception. Again, understanding the root, the problem we're trying to solve as we're flushing out the product backlog. What is the customer need? that we're trying to fill. Also, during construction, we can use it at, in our refinement sessions at a story level. What is the problem the story itself is trying to solve? What is it we're trying to do, and why is it so important to the overall product? And then, of course, my example, I used it in the retrospective with the team to understand what was, one of the problems they were seeing over and over again in their process. Poka-Yoke, this one is a technique to avoid simple human error in the workplace. It's also known as mistake proofing or goof proofing. You might have heard of it called fail-safe work methods. It's simply a system that's designed to prevent inadvertent errors made by workers. So if we can automate or take over repetitive tasks that rely on a worker's memory or vigilance and guard against it, any lapse in focus, it will help us prevent defects. So I think of this when I think of a production line of a tangible product. If you think of the way they design the components or parts and the tools they use, it can only go one way. They design the actual components that it literally cannot be performed incorrectly. It can only fit one way. So what we want to do in our software delivery is ensure that the proper conditions exist before we execute the next process step. We want to make sure it's so that we are building that quality in so it literally cannot be done wrong. So how do we do this in the world of software development? Well, we can test earlier. We can look at building the tests with the requirements so that when the developer goes to actually create the code, they're building it to pass a test. That once it passes, it's fail-proof. So in the context of a user story, let's look at some steps. We would identify the story. We might use the 5 whys or that Ishikawa diagram to understand the root problem and the ways the process could fail. So we want to determine the acceptance criteria required to pass the story and then design the solution accordingly. Then we want to allow that developer to code in order to pass the criteria, automating whenever possible. So I had lots of steps in there. You may not, this is a very sequential looking diagram. It's meant to show you that we want to look at quality at every step and build in automation wherever we can. Once it's passed, we want to run that test with each new release or build. And then we want to demo it early for feedback to the stakeholder with the goal of delighting them, with the goal of achieving their acceptance criteria. And then we want to measure the success of that Poka-Yoke process, refine and improve it for the next story. So there is a technique called 3 Amigos where we bring together developers, testers, and the business to define and agree upon the story for shared understanding, define and agree upon acceptance criteria, and adherence to that definition of ready so that the conditions are there. So we would use this during user story writing and then also during deployment because we want those tests to be considered throughout the process and automated wherever possible. So this was the big picture of everything we covered today. You'll see that it runs across the spectrum of our life cycle. Lots of them I talked about can be initially formulating as part of that product backlog, understanding the product roadmap, understanding the customer, and then through our process at the team level, understanding our process, identifying and removing wasteful steps, and then of course considering quality all the way through. So I just wanted to take the last couple of minutes to look at Disciplined Agile itself and DevOps. Now, I'm no DevOps expert. I've been in a few implementations. but Brent is here, so I will lean on him to correct me if I say anything off kilter. I'm just going to get a Halls here because my voice is acting funny today. So this is Disciplined Agile. And you're probably thinking, oh my goodness, like I did when I first saw it. But just like a construction contractor will bring a toolkit to the job site, once they evaluate the issue at hand, what it is you need fixed by your construction guy, they know which tools to use. So I think of Disciplined Agile as your toolkit for enterprise agility. So it includes some of the techniques I showed today and a wealth more than that. It addresses that enterprise as a whole and not just IT. So that teal layer is the agile delivery teams in IT and the DevOps, so some of the other IT teams. But we know we don't work in a silo. We work with the broader organization. So they do give guidance for DevOps. And we talked about right at the beginning, that foundational layer, the principles, promises, and guidelines. That's underpinning everything. So when I look at DevOps Defined, I really like this definition from Gartner. It's talking about a change in culture through the adoption of agile and lean practices. It emphasizes people and culture and seeks to improve collaboration between ops and dev teams. So if Agile was intended to improve our collaboration between the business and IT, which quite often is a positive side effect of it, DevOps then improves our collaboration between our IT silos. And then we look at automation. So from the DA discipline DevOps, the definition they have is the streamlining of IT solution development and operations activities, along with supporting enterprise activities like security, data management, business operations, to provide more effective outcomes to an organization. So like those cogs, the largest focus is on the people and collaboration, the culture side, looking at having the culture that values the values and principles, the promises and guidelines in DA. And then we want to use the agile and lean practices that set the stage for automating the right process to delivering the highest value. So to me, the lean and agile culture piece of it, the mindset and practices are prerequisites to taking your organization to the next level DevOps. Because without that culture of the continuous improvement and learning, the culture of self-organization and collaborative teams, we're really not going to get it into that lean and agile practices to really automate the right things. We might just be automating for the sake of automating. So this is not an all-encompassing list of lean and agile practices for DevOps. This came out of a DevOps training I took from Pink Elephant years ago. But when they look at the voice of the customer, we saw the Kano model, the value stream map. They call out value stream mapping. Lean process optimization, we're looking at the 5S. We're looking at Poka-Yoke potentially, and value stream mapping. For visual management, we know that transparency is so important in Agile. We use things like dashboards, visual radiators, information radiators to help keep everyone on the same page. The Agile practices are self-explanatory. Test-driven development, that's that Poka-Yoke. We're building quality in. And then continual service improvement, where we want to get to the state of delighting our stakeholders. So some of the other practices in DevOps are going to be out of those ITIL practices like service asset management, change management, knowledge management, release management, etc. And there's lots more information in the Disciplined Agile DevOps blade. So just to summarize, first we looked at the Agile values and principles, and I contrasted those to the Lean principles and briefly discussed how I feel they're very much aligned. And then I provided you an overview of a couple of tools, and then looked at how both Lean and Agile are prerequisites to DevOps. So I have lots of time here. If you have questions or comments or anything you've seen, I would love to hear from you on what you've used. And Brent, I might remind you that some of the folks that joined after might not have gotten that newsletter link. You might want to throw that in the chat again.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, please copy this. And I'm sorry there isn't links in the chat itself. I think we probably do that on purpose. But if you subscribe, we have the guild that we're trying to run fairly regularly. But before I talk about that, let's get your guys' thoughts. If there are any questions, I know some of you are using Lean or talking about value streams perhaps in your organization or thinking about it. So any questions for Lisa or myself?
Or how have you used it? I'm curious to learn from you too.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone want to share how Lean's going for them?
In my case, I will say that I have known some of the tools, some of those principles, but I haven't used them like strictly in project management so far. It's like I have implemented some of them during the planning or during the execution, but I haven't used them like a framework, like very structured. So it's interesting. But I haven't been on software development either. It's more consultancies and delivering products for government. So.
Excellent. Oh, thanks for sharing.
Government is ripe for waste removal.
Yes.
There's so much opportunity there.
Absolutely. Lots.
So for most organizations, I shouldn't pick on government, but.
Yeah, excellent. And I know it's hard thinking about Lean in the construction mode. So if you think about Scrum and Agile, you're building stuff. So Lean is very important. And Lisa gave some awesome examples, retrospectives to go back to root cause analysis. But where does, when we talk about Lean and value streams, it's underpinning something which is getting value to people as fast as possible. So that's removing those delays. And sometimes, you can only do so much in the construction phase. You really need to go back to, so at least it was showing the concept in inception phase, when the ideas are happening and business is trying to find out, hey, what do my customers want? Or my customers do want this. I want to get it to them as soon as possible. How do we do that? And that's where, these various tools can be really, really effective. Anybody else want to share how Lean or any of the tools maybe here or some additional tools that you're using?
Lisa, this is Ed, and I just have a quick question.
Sure.
I'm curious about the 9 product owners that you were talking about. How did you end up, I guess, consolidating or prioritizing their requirements?
Yeah, so they ended up, it was never solved to my satisfaction that I thought would help the team in the best way. But what they ended up doing was having a proxy who had the final say so. So they still had this steering committee, if you will, of 9 product owners who all had their priority lists that fed one team backlog. But at least we had someone who had the final say. So it took it to that. No, ideally what they would do is either A, restructure because the team had so many interdependencies with other teams that they could have restructured to make a fuller cross-functional team with a focus on a single line or product. That would have been one option. Another option, if the restructure wasn't, the organization wasn't too fond of that approach. Another option would have been what they did end up doing was having a proxy who had regular availability to the team that represented those people with the best they could do on a very short notice to the team. So it wasn't a bad interim, but yeah, probably the better solution longer term would be to relook at how the actual teams were structured to get a fuller cross function.
Thank you. Excellent presentation, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
That's great. And just on that point, in Discipline Agile, we have a life cycle called the program life cycle. And that's really about the teams of teams. So it's kind of scaling out. And this is what happens a lot of times with organizations that we've seen is they grow, and that think they're getting awesome, delivery, DevOps is moving in the right direction. But when you've got competing agendas and people not really understanding maybe where the best value is, that's where the program lifecycle can help, where it can help restructure around that. So restructure your value in a sense where maybe your product ownership and product coordination starts to kick in, and you have some sort of improvements that you can make at that level to help the teams then be able to understand what needs to be done and what priority. And that's it's an organizational change as well, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, Lisa.
Yeah, it sure is. It just brings me to mind the other thing that team did, because that unplanned work was constant, and even after we made it very transparent, painfully transparent to the decision makers, actually, they ended up pivoting from sprints to lean lifecycle or Kanban, where it was just the next highest thing. It was more of a flow pull through. And that also made a significant difference, specifically in the morale of the team, because it's very defeating for a team to have carryover sprint after sprint after sprint. So that was another change they made. It didn't help the product owner issue, but it did help in terms of their focus.
Yeah, that's an awesome point. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, I'm wondering, what experience do you have? I mean, this has been just the problem I've had for a very long time. A lot of IT, we're in this weirdly weird cycle, if you're old enough, you remember this from the 90s, where the technical debt, which then was all mainframe and kind of, Y2K driven, and the cool stuff was ERP and e-commerce or 1.0 or whatever. Today, it's sort of like all those ERP, e-commerce, Java systems are the legacy, and all the digital stuff's the new stuff now. That stuff tends to be so bundled up and just kind of rammed through vendor management now and procurement, where you just, it's like you can't, or what I found is it's very difficult to get anyone on that side, because it's finance driven basically, to connect the dots with the value, the cost of delay, poor data quality. I mean, the whole workbench. What experience have you had in trying to get them to sort of, shift? I jokingly say shift to the middle, right? Like not even shift left, just like get them sort of, out of the corner. Because I find that what happens is you just get locked into these outsourcing contracts. And it's a total race to the bottom, talent quality. It's not their fault, right? I mean, they're given an impossible sort of deal. I mean, what has been your experience with that?
So are you asking about the challenge of the way it's financed?
No.
You're the challenge of the technical debt, just so I understand.
No, the challenge of the humans, right? The decision makers, right? Who are basically do not understand what we're talking about when it comes to basically delivering legacy with value, which is really kind of the whole point that I'm talking about here, right? That you can't, you can do all these models with legacy, not just cool cloud native projects, and they've sort of disassociated from the two. And then you have basically your legacy just gets, you know, basically ground to mush, which a lot of times turns into a big chunk of your value chain. And that happens faster than you can come up with cool new digital. So basically the company is just getting ground down, and it's successive contract after contract. I mean, I've been seeing this for 7-8 years now.
Yeah.
Company.
Yeah. And
wondering-
have I thrown these tools at it? I guess the one thing that I think these tools can bring to light is give you the data to have the conversation.
Mhm.
So if you're coming in the one team I worked with, it was real. They were buried in technical debt. They were on a COT system that was nearly impossible to upgrade anymore because of the amount of customization. The vendor was, you know, because they weren't doing regular upgrades. The vendor wasn't open to helping, and blah blah blah. I'm sure you understand the realm there. But they couldn't have that conversation with the business or the finance people or even the procurement people because they weren't able to make it tangible. So if we can make the issue visible using these tools or other tools somehow to show them the data. So with the value stream map, it's not just about delivering a feature, but now as part of the feature, not stopping at that delivery, we also know that there's all these defects in our legacy that cause us rework, that cause your business workarounds, manual or otherwise. Mouse clicks you can count, you know, when you're mapping processes. We've done it that way in terms of understanding, you know, if we add this thing, this custom thing, what are the implications down the line? To your point, what are the vendor implications if we customize this to add this button you want, as opposed to using this feature over here that might solve the same. So it's really about understanding the problem they're trying to solve.
Yep.
And at the best to our ability with the information we have, making that decision going forward. There's a good book, and I thought I had it sitting here. I was going to show it to you, but it's not. It's called Make Work Visible by Dominica de Grandis. That's a really good one for having, showing these impediments and for the purpose of discussing with decision makers.
Yeah.
And that's key, absolutely. So, you know, back to the value stream, why I mentioned that earlier in terms of like the chat underpinning Lisa's points, it's back to the inherent problem. And the inherent problem is that no one is really managing value. It's really scary. You look at most organizations today and you say, who's managing value? Oh, I am. And then you see, okay, let's have this conversation. So I put a link up. Hopefully it'll work for you. If not, ping me after and I'll send you what I can. I believe it's public now. So the bottom line is that conversation to say, well, okay, what's the most valuable thing you think your customers are purchasing? If it's a revenue-based thing, or if it's service and government, what is the most valuable thing for your citizen? And if they determine that, that's good. If they don't know, well, okay, let's just pick 5 things. And then if you follow how that value gets created and then delivered, at least, you know, then you say, okay, well, who's managing? Well, I don't know. That's Joe way down here, and that's Mary down over here, and that's Fred over here. Okay, so now you start mapping it, and that's the point. You realize no one is really managing it, and if it is being managed, it's going up the chain and down the chain and across here. So your legacy value piece, your new shiny, awesome stuff is another set of value streams. You start realizing that, hey, let's understand this, and let's get the people who run the business to manage the value. Now you can have a conversation about, okay, why are we spending money over here? Why are we having 14 people in an IT department now called DevOps and no one can touch them or talk to them because they're special, right? They get the special coffee. All these kind of conversations start coming up, and not in a negative way, but it starts that conversation around getting to the root cause, as we said, and value streams are great for that. If you're not doing value streams, I highly recommend you start looking at it. they will start to bubble up. To Lisa's point, I haven't read that book, so correct me if I'm wrong, Lisa, but it helps to bubble up things that should be transparent, have the conversation, and go back to the inherent problem, which is companies today are hierarchical. The value streams are happening down at the staff level, and things are bubbling up and down, but no one is managing value in most cases. Unless you're a lean startup, then there might be a little bit of that happening.
So Aaron, the other really good thing to talk about to the way your projects are funded, oftentimes it's the funding model that causes them to. But if you can quantify the cost of delay, if you can quantify why it's taking 6 months with this legacy system and it's a couple of sprints with this new and groovy stuff, but yet how many of your customers or staff are using the legacy versus the new and groovy, like the adoption rates, and you can really change the conversation quantifying that cost of the waste, the delay, the waiting, the server, requiring server builds as opposed to I can just bring up an instance on my own developer desktop and away I go, right? So yeah, they have to look at the problem differently. Make work visible is Dominica. It came out of the operations area actually, and so she's talking about some of the problems that they see getting hammered from 17 different directions and whatnot. It's a really quick read. You don't have to read it cover to cover. You can look at your problem that you're faced with, and it's very practical. Walks through different techniques to try and use.
Oh, that's awesome. No, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think we're in this weird position. It's the exact same place we were 20 or so years ago, where we're sort of, my friend put it really well. It's like if you've been unfortunate enough to have divorces in your family or, whatever, there's sort of like the divorce side of the family is the late legacy maintenance, whatever. And then it's the new cool family, it's all the new cool stuff. But you still have the responsibilities to the other side. And we have sort of this strange world where, most of the value and the value stream and companies are on that side. I mean, they just, it's 90, unless it's a startup, between 95 to 99.9. And all the energy is on this other side, on the new family, and there's no one kind of taking care of responsibilities. And what I'm recognizing is, in the last 5 years, this, basically decampment of all the talent that even was aware of it. People just aren't even aware. So now it's just the only people who are aware of it are multiple generations of outsourcers. So I found, it sounds kind of crazy, better off, I'll go look in parts of other markets, India especially, for people who used to work on a system that they have, but maybe 8-10 years ago, which is some sort of like, kind of funky way to go hire somebody, but basically they at least had a 2012 vantage point on it.
Right.
And typically they care more about it than somebody who's a new DevOps person or a new kind of cloud native AWS person today.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to mention was that, when you're talking back to procurement and even just the cycle of bringing in vendors or systems, even the way that our organizations look at projects, even if our delivery teams have moved to Agile, quite often the procurement, the legal, the project portfolio office, or whatever flavor your company calls it, where they're doing the business casing and budgeting side of it, is still very, the approaches are still trying to be very planful, knowing everything up front, and then throw it over the fence with people who are saying, we don't need to know everything up front, we just need to know the next most important thing. So beyond budgeting, I'd point you to that. There's webinars and a book where they're looking at shifting that piece of the organization to get out of the 5-year plans with annual budgeting. And it's looking at busting that into a different way that's more conducive to products with a customer focus or a strategy focus, and breaking that down a different way. It's a different, just like Agile is a different way of looking at your work. Beyond budgeting is a different way of looking at that, the way your organization looks at projects. And the other one is this one that I happen to have handy, project to product, which is another way of looking at your work, getting out of that project mentality of a clear start and end, and a clear scope to what is the next thing, most important thing to our customer. Other way around, Brett. Project.
Oh, sorry, I thought it was other way around. I'm getting dyslexic.
You're going backwards.
Project to product. Yeah. No, you don't want to go the other way around. Sorry. And actually, Mick.
So those are two that they really resonated with me, and I actually think this Mick with this book works with that Dominica, because he references her a couple times.
Is Dominica in Canada or?
I don't believe so.
Okay, because I know Mick's in Vancouver, but yeah, that's great. They're both awesome books, and yeah, I highly recommend. I mean, the project to product is again a full mind change, because it doesn't matter about the technology per se. Technology is about 10%, but yet we're driven 90% of the time by tech, unfortunately, as you were talking about, Aaron, thinking about cloud or native stuff versus, legacy. When we think of projects that way, you're going to have the problems we have today. And now we're coming back to the fact that we need to be one family, not the cool kids. The kids always suffer, using your analogy there. And who are the kids? Well, that's the citizens, right? That's right. That's the customer. So if we go back to Mick's stuff, he's talking a lot about, hey, to be successful, effective teams, we need to think about building products and also taking those products away. So if we start thinking about, oh yeah, I'm incurring some technical debt, I know it, and I'm managing it by at some point removing the technical debt somehow, and that might be turning off the product, because projects finish, right? They start and stop. Yeah. And fortunately, what they leave behind does not. Awesome. Okay, any other quick questions before we wrap up a bit? Everybody?
It's awesome.
Any other questions? Well, thank you so much. We'll be putting this up on our YouTube, if that's okay with everyone. If it's not, send me an email, and we'll just cut out any bits. I'll see if I can black out any video if anyone's blacked out. But yeah, we're going to put it up there so you can go back and look at it. And Lisa, you did mention perhaps we'll have the PowerPoint up for in PDF form or something.
Yeah, I can send you the PDF, Brent, wherever you want to put that. Yeah.
Great. So we'll do that and make that available. Anybody have any other last second questions?
I would like to say, if you're going to send a message with the PDF, can you add the link to the YouTube channel? Or could you give me the name of the YouTube channel?
100%. Yeah. You'll find us. Yeah. So I'll send you the link to that. If you go to YouTube, I think Tech, you'll see DA Guild. So all the stuff before, we used to just put the stuff actually on a repository on Git. Which is great for geeks. But when you get into this now with the DA Guild, I thought, well, let's start recording this. Because before we were live, but now we have the fantastic abilities to talk to people all over the world. So we really thank you for your time. Stay cool wherever you are, or enjoy the sun, if that's your thing. And we'll see you probably in about a month or so. We'll be putting up another event. So
thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Lisa. Did an awesome job on the presentation. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Okay, have a good night.